What's going on, YouTube? NorthStarCedh here, and we have someone new. You might not recognize him, or you might do. We have Jordan here. Most notably, he won the Boil 2.
How's it going, everyone? To those who don't know me, I my big accomplishment, won the Boil 2 on Tymna Thrasios. I've been playing, let's see, CDH for about a year and a couple months and change. Started with Marnius Calgar, moved over to Najila for a bit, and then kind of playing a little bit of TNT and Kidden right now. That's pretty much been it. I've done pretty well with TNT. Not unfortunately not this past weekend, but before that, I top 16 SCG Con. I've top 4 Lotus Bowl. Won the Boil obviously, and then top 16 a few other smaller events. So it's been a pretty good run. Obviously just this past weekend ended a little on the rougher note, but that's okay. It happens sometimes.
Right? It happens to everyone.
Yeah.
So, but no, like huge props to you for making a big run, multiple big runs. How has TNT been for you in some of these bigger events?
Yeah, so it feels really good most big events. I think it's a really strong deck. You've got card draw in the command zone, you've got your infinite mana outlet in the command zone, and the density of good creature tutors combined with really good ramp, combined with a good interaction package and the silence effects, it really kind of does everything. It gives you a lot of really efficient win cons to close games out. And I think, the deck's probably in the top 4 or 5 decks, maybe even top 3. Um, even this weekend, notwithstanding, where it did seem like people were a little bit more geared for TNT and a little bit more ready for the deck, and that's I think probably just a sign of how much of a reputation it's gained and how dominant it's been, and that allowed for other decks to do a little bit better, like the Kinnons and the Blue Farms have kind of risen
Right.
back up. So I do think it's in a strong place, and I do really enjoy the deck and the play pattern that it brings.
I'm a big fan of TNT. Before your list that you won the Boil 2 with, I was playing around with my version of TNT, and it was more combo-y, but it didn't have half the stuff that you had. I think it was like a staggering 35 cards different.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow, that's crazy.
right. So then it's just like I kept coming into a position of like, all right, it's in this awkward position. It's wanting to do one thing and it feels bad at it. And so I just scrapped that and went after years and just been slowly tweaking it for the meta here in Minnesota. But
Yeah,
I love the TNT. I've gotten a
yeah.
couple people onto it, so I can't really play. Happens when you're a TO.
Yeah, that's
So
fair. Yeah, so obviously I think everyone knows the big lines, right? The Devoted Druid and the Hazel Brewmaster line, kind of the newest one and probably the best one in the deck. It's the easiest to assemble. You've got 3 ways you can assemble it without even having the cards in your hand. It's the Survival of the Fittest. Obviously, you can pitch another creature, get the Devoted Druid, pitch the Devoted Druid, and then grab the Brewmaster. You can, if you've got the Devoted Druid already, you can Neoform the Devoted Druid into Eternal Witness, get back the Neoform the Eternal Witness into Hazel's, and then you've got the Devoted Druid into Eldritch Evolution into your Hazels. So you've got a lot of different lines that make it really simple. You also have the Swift reconfiguration if for some reason that just comes up first, or you don't have Hazels. And what's really cool about this is even if someone tries to exile your Devoted Druid, you can always kill it off later, just
right,
by neg one itself, even if it's summoning 6, so that you can try
right.
again at later turn with the Hazel. So you're never in really danger of necessarily losing that card unless someone's running Graveyard Hate specifically, which kind of hit or miss if you see it. So that line it ends up being really efficient. Of course, you still have your Thoracle, Demonic Constellation, Tana Pack lines that are always going to be there. Probably the most efficient line in all of CEDH, but
Right.
also risky and dangerous sometimes.
Yeah.
Then we run Kinnan Basalt, and the idea behind both the Devoted Druid line and the Kinnan Basalt line is that you're creating the infinite mana, then you're filtering it into Thrasios to draw out your deck, and then we win by either playing the Thassa's Oracle or Finale of Devastation, just by playing out all of our creatures, and then we swing for lethal. So those are the big lines. The one that kind of is a little bit more controversial, just because a lot of people either really love it or you really hate it, is the Retraction Helix line. So if you have the Birds of Paradise or that's not summoning sick, or you just have the otter that's not summoning sick. You need the otter either way, the Valley Flood Caller. And as long as you have a Valley Flood Caller that's not summoning sick, or a bird, frog, otter, or rat that's not summoning sick, you can target whatever the non-summoning sick creature is with the Retraction Helix, and then do infinite untaps as long as you can keep recasting, one spell, a mana positive rock, so that you can create infinite mana. And this is the only way that the deck actually creates infinite colored mana that isn't green. So that is one thing that I've noticed at times when people are asking, like, well, what about, like, if you want to do the Fairy Mastermind lines where you make people draw out their entire deck? Well, the only way to actually do that line in the deck currently is by doing the Valley Flood Color line. So again, people love it or hate it. Retraction Helix is a one-drop instant, and those are the most counterable spell in the entire game. So a lot of people don't like it, but it is one of the lines that I still run, though I am, just based on some results that happened this weekend, thinking about maybe getting off of it as well.
Really? I'm a fan of it.
I mean, I won my top 16 game in the boil with it. I've won other games with it. The biggest issue I was running into is that because you have to tap the creature, it's an activated ability, and the sheer amount of cursed totems that are running around right now make it really tough. I ran into cursed totem in my first 4 games this past weekend.
Wow.
And I had Retraction Helix in 2 of them, and it's the first time where I realized this Retraction Helix kind of sucks. Like, it doesn't work. It's, a lot of times I've replaced Into the Floodmaw on my list with it, and it's been fine because it functionally fills the same slot. But with Curse Totem, it does give you this kind of weird shut off where someone plays a Curse Totem, they shut you out of literally all of your major lines. They shut you out of the Devoted Druid line, they shut you out of the Retraction Helix line, and the Kidden Basalt line. So, because even though you can create the infinite mana, unless you have a way to remove the Curse Totem, you can't filter through Thrasios. And I don't know that having 3 lines in a deck that that can be shut off by 1 card makes sense moving forward.
It's understandable. I mean, that's the one downside with Thrasios is, like, Curse Totem just shuts it down, which there is a decent amount of removal you have in your list. Abrupt Decay, Rift, of course, all the counter spells. As long as you have them, yeah, Curse Totem just shuts down a lot of this deck, and that's the one downside.
And you have to have you have to have those spells in hand, and I think the problem I ran into this weekend is a lot of times I just didn't have them. Like, they just weren't there for me. I felt like I had a lot of games I was looking for it, or there was one game where I could have removed the Curse Totem, but I'd already committed to the Thoracle line anyway, so I ended up removing something else because it was more dangerous. And kind of thinking back on it, I was like, maybe I should have just removed the Curse Totem to increase my flexibility. But I mean, those are games where it's like, you kind of live and learn and try to make better decisions next time. But I did find, we do run some removal, but really it's actually not as much as I was thinking it was. We run a lot of creature removal and bounce spells, but when you're really looking at the list, you're really only seeing 3 pieces of removal for a Curse Totem. It's Abrupt Decay, Cyclonic Rift, and then Boseiju. So I actually do think the list needs to go up on removal for Curse Totem. And while we can definitely play around it, the Tymna plan is just slower than the Thrasios plan can be. And I think when you're talking about games that start to stretch out, the Tymna plan gets worse and worse as games go on because we just don't have enough evasive attackers in the same way that T&K does.
Right. That's the one thing that I do like about the deck is if we go on the Thrasios plan, it's can be very fast. Turn 3-ish, usually you can present a win with or without protection, depending on board state and pod. But
Seed Point's such a busted card, and it's so explosive. So if you do land it, especially if you have the One Ring, but even without it, right, you just end up drawing so many cards and putting lands into play, and it's really, really tough for your opponents to come back from a rotation of Seedborn Muse on the board, even if it's, I guess it depends, right? If it's one rotation and you're getting 1 card a turn, it's probably not the end of the world. But if you're getting 2, 3 Thrasios activations on a per turn in a single rotation, that's really hard to come back from when you're playing against TNT.
You're seeing more cards than everyone else can potentially, I should say.
Yeah.
So, what are some hot cards that you really like in the list that you have seen success with in these bigger events, and some cards that have just been complete duds?
Man, that's actually a tough one because I don't think that any cards are necessarily duds. I think there are more not maybe it's not necessarily the most efficient card for that slot. So like a good example is like Polywog kind of was like in and out because at times it felt decent, at other times it felt terrible. So, I don't know that there's very many duds when you're running a 4-color pile because it's just kind of hard to put a bad card. I mean, I guess it's not hard, but it's when you're looking at the choices, it just becomes kind of a gluttony of choices that you have at your disposal, and so it
Right.
starts becoming kind of hard to put bad cards in. But I think the cards that do put in more work that I do see people, talk about, maybe I don't need it, is cards like Culling Ritual. Just such a powerful card, but the amount of TNT players who I've seen who are like, I don't know if I want to keep going with this card, and I don't know that I really like it, but it's such a powerful ritual that really does enable you to close games really quickly once it lands. And I'm surprised the amount of people who are not seeing a lot of success with the card.
I mean, there's one instance I tried to push a calling ritual for a win attempt, and they stopped it, so I was out of the game, and that was the biggest factor that I needed to is there was a soul cauldron out. I needed to get rid of that. All I had at the time was calling ritual, and then that was the extra mana that I needed for brewmaster as well through the calling
Yeah.
ritual.
And that's the thing, right? Like, yeah, it gets countered. I mean, it's always going to be a card that people want to counter,
Mhm.
but if you time it right, it just ends up being so powerful. And I mean, all powerful cards are gonna eat counter spells. It's just a
Right.
factor of being a powerful card. So in situations like that, it's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have pushed it, but if you did land it, right, you do win the game. So there's something to be said about, like, yeah, it's dangerous to cast, but if it does land, and I think if you're doing it properly, it's going to land more often than not, then you're going to probably win the game really quickly.
Oh, for sure.
Um, I think another card that people, it's not that it's slept on because everyone knows it's a powerful card, but I think when we think about the engines that are occurring in games, we always look at Ristic Studies first and cards that copy Ristic Study. And, Waffle this weekend winning because he had 3 Ristic Studies in a single game. And I think, obviously, we all know how powerful Ristic Study is. But
Right.
Smothering Tithe it's kind of like its cousin that people sometimes, I think, forget about. And I think
Oh yeah.
I am the person who lands a Smothering Tithe, I've almost never seen lose unless someone else also lands a Smothering Tithe,
Right.
in which still someone that has a Smothering Tithe won that game. And even more than Ristic Study, I think it's the card that gets so overwhelming so fast, especially in a TNT list where you can convert that extra mana into resources. It just puts you in a place where people struggle to come back from it. And I think every time I've seen it land, the game ends very, very quickly, in a rotation or two, because the resource accumulation just gets so out of hand and people stop paying for Smothering Tithe. And you'll see it a lot too, where it's like someone's got like 6 7 treasures, and you'll see like people be like, who cares, they've already got a ton of treasures. But then that quickly spirals into 14 15 20
Right.
treasures. And at that point they can do whatever they want. Like
Right.
everything in their hands getting cast, they can probably do some Thrasios activations. Like, it's crazy what happens when people just kind of let you have it. I mean, you get a Kinnan on the board, it gets even dumber. So it's one of those cards that I think, everyone's like, okay, let's look at the Ristics and the Ristics, and makes sense. But the Tithe, I think, is in many ways maybe a more powerful card that just gets kind of slept on because people want to draw cards more than they want to make extra mana a lot of games.
Right. And that's the other thing too is responsible Magic players that we are. Who pays for smothering tithe? You know,
It's so rare. Like,
I don't.
people don't, right? They'd rather do other stuff. And 2 mana's a lot, right? Like, it's one thing when you're like, okay, I don't really care about this person having extra treasures because they still need to have the cards to deal with me. So if you can land a Tithe early, you end up just this massive glut of resources that people are just kind of like shrugging
Right.
their shoulders at, and they don't realize, like, mana is usually the turning point in this game. It's card selection, sure, and being able to see more cards, but because we can convert that mana into cards, it creates this weird dynamic that people aren't really paying attention to. And I do find it strange sometimes that how often we just kind of shrug our shoulders at Smothering Tithe. And then certain decks, especially decks like Sisay that can land a Smothering Tithe, that's game changing for them. So
Right.
I do think it's an interesting card that is not slept on is probably not the right word, but it is a card that I think people forget about, like just how powerful it is.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing too. Is it's everyone knows Ristic and how good it can be, as far as just drawing cards left and right. But at the same time, is like you get three treasures. I mean, unless someone has infinite mana, but even then, two mana is nothing for them. Or you have the player that's literally doing nothing, that is out of the game. So sure, why not? We'll pay for your smothering tithe because I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, that's like the only time you see it, right? Is like when people are out of the game or they're just like, oh, I have nothing else I can do. So, most of the time though, you're getting all your treasures. You're getting at least 3 a rotation, probably
Right.
more, generally more, especially with how prominent draw engines are. So,
Oh yeah.
it's one way. Like if you're gonna fight into a triple Ristic pod, how do you turn the tide on that? Well, drop a Tithe in there. Now you're making so much mana that yeah, you're fighting through cards, but they're going to be fighting through you being able to keep going again and again and again and again because even though you draw cards, you still are going to run out of mana at some point, right? There's only so much
Right.
free interaction that exists. But if I'm making more mana every time you draw to fight me, well, then I'm going to keep going. And
Right.
especially if I have a draw engine on top of that, now I can keep going and I can cast all the stuff that's going. And then you add the flash enablers on top of that, and it gets dumb. It just gets so dumb so quickly.
Oh, I know, it's fantastic. Um. So one thing I do want to bring up: how has Mystic Remora been for you? Because lately, every time I drop an early Mystic, just everyone just dumps their creatures, no non-creature spells, and then it just all right, fish dies, and I draw one card. Whereas I've had games with Polywig Prodigy, I draw more cards with Prodigy than I do with Fish or Esper Sentinel, and it's on par with Ristic.
Yeah, I think fish is fine. I mean, you're still think about Kitten, Blue Farm, like they still are rock focused first. Like yeah, Kitten has dorks, but if they can get their rocks first, those are a lot harder to interact with. Like I look at yeah, like Teen K, Roxai, Sisay, a lot of these decks are not necessarily dork. Magda. Well, Magda's kind of different, but
Magda's a
Tivit,
different
like
story.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, there's a lot of decks that are kind of sitting there that are more rock focused first, and I think anytime a deck is more rock focused, like the fish is going to be great. Like it's going to feel amazing. So you just got to kind of think about like when you're thinking Crom is what like 10% of the meta or something like that. So that's a deck you're going to see a lot, and that the only way for them to deploy early outside of like a Ragavan is just by playing out their rocks. Like that's how that's their mana production outside of their land. So decks like that, it's going to feel really great. Kittens, it's going to feel really great. Like I don't think Mr. Gamora is in a bad place. I mean, even a TNT deck, right? Like we still run a decent chunk of artifacts that are going to that we're going to want to deploy, and sometimes it means deploying them into the fish so that we can stay, online with everyone else. What is it? Malcolm Viles, Krux like there's quite a few decks that I think Mr. Gamora is in a fine place. It's pod dependent. I think like
Right.
if you're running into a triple green pod, maybe not so good. But
Oh
I don't know.
no,
I don't know. I'd still play the early fish and pay for it as long as I could.
we're not gonna live back the nightmares of big dumb green idiots. Since you don't know, our last 3K event, which was 2024, big dumb green idiots Kona took first place, took home an underground sea because
Oh,
apparently,
jeez.
yeah. Well, here's the best part too: is in the finals, they got a early void winner, and the two other blue decks, because it was Magda, Kona, and two other blue decks, just could not deal with the void winner.
Yeah.
So
It's a common problem. I mean, one of the things I like again about TNT, most of our interaction package and like a lot of our big spells that we want to cast, they're not necessarily even mana. So we can cast like our Valley Footcaller, and the Retraction Helix line, and the Soul Ring, and we can play right through a Void Winnower. All of our
Right.
interaction, like swords, is one drop. I've seen some people who are on Path Tags. I mean, obviously, we couldn't cast the Deadly Rollick, but you could put the what's it called, the Retraction Helix on it. Like there's plenty of options. I think it just depends on the deck and who you're playing with, and that, and I think with a deck like Kona, you have to understand, like, that's really, it's Kona, right? You just kill Kona and you're probably
Right.
fine.
I
But a lot of
mean,
people are a lot of people are greedy. They take the greed route and they're not ready for the big dumb stompy guys to come out, and all of a sudden the big dumb stompy guys hit you in the face.
yeah, that's literally what it came down to. Is there was an, I think it was like turn two Kona. I gotta pull up the video to recall everything, but yeah, like, it was like turn two Kona. Started doing Kona things, and then all of a sudden Void Winter, and like it literally shut down the two other blue decks. Magda was more or less out of it by the time Void Winter came out because let's face it, Magda. But yeah, no, it's so. And then the other thing too is like, so the last event in December, Glarb made top four. So we've got Glarb running around up here.
I
What
like that
else?
deck a lot.
Uh, TNT took it. Let's see. Oh, well, obviously I don't know if you remember Zeke, who you beat in the semis for the Boil 2. He's a local,
Okay.
so he's always playing something. He's always in the top cut. Um, we've got Rogsai running around. Not as much anymore, but some Rogsai. A blue farm, usually one or two. Croc Silas, we've got that one running around. So there's,
Deck.
yeah,
I don't.
he wins by the flip and loses by the flip,
Oh,
literally.
I've seen it happen. I saw a guy miss. Was it like 4 demonic tutor flips in a row? And I was like, brother,
Yeah,
please cast a Sakashima so it's better for you, please.
yeah, I think the worst he did in a tournament, he lost 6 flips in a row. Like, it was absurd. So, but no, there's a decent variety up here in Minnesota, so it's always fun to see something new. And then when a newer deck comes through, like when Kona came in, everyone's like, "What is this?" You know. So
Yeah, it's a pretty spicy deck too. It can win a lot of ways. One of the other like mono green decks I like a lot is the Lumra deck. That one's really funny.
oh yeah, it's I've been
The bear.
yeah, who there's someone in one of the discords I'm in that was posting about it. It was one of the SCG events that Luma went deep into it, and so people are talking about it again still.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was like Columbus, right? That was top 4 that
I think
It was
that's
Lumra.
I think that's what it was. So of
Yeah.
course people are talking about it again, and it's like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, welcome to Big Dumb Creature Beats. You know.
It's funny, right? Because in a meta where it's like people drop these engines and then they just kind of want to sit back,
Hmm.
kind of hard to do against mono green sometimes because mono green is going to come and hit you in the face. You don't have time to sit there and hide behind your draw engines and wait for things to happen. And I don't know, Kona's not necessarily casting spells, right?
Right.
He's tapping and then he's going to next phase and then he's dropping something gross in and then you're sitting there going, what the heck
Hmm.
keeps happening? So I think mono green is actually funny enough, like in kind of an interesting place from a gameplay perspective. Just the way it can play on the meta sometimes. I don't know that it'll ever be consistent enough to take down big tournaments, but I do think it can sneak in, there, here and there and do well for
Oh,
sure.
for sure. Um. Oh, the last video that I just put out, we did a deck tech with Obnix's Captive Kingpin, and his list is fantastic.
Yeah,
So
that's a
it's
good deck.
so the meta is, as you know, very Ristic study heavy, draw engine heavy, and he just leans into that as far as, all right, go ahead. I'm not gonna pay for your Ristics. And there was times where, like, even in the semis where one of the opponents had a Ristic study out and they chose not to draw just because of, you know, their the Ristic player is going to see one card, he's going to see two, three cards, you
Yeah.
know.
When he's got all the pingers out, yeah.
Oh yeah, so it was fantastic. That was Cole. He did. The only reason he lost in the finals was because he mulled down to four, and it still kept a very questionable four. So otherwise, he would have
I mean,
ran away with it as far as um, his games were going, because everyone's drawing multiple cards off Ristic, and
yeah, I built an Agila list that was similar, where it like kind of preyed on a Ristic study meta. Like it was, or the Mystic Remora as well. It was a lot of creatures. It was a lot of like just put stuff into play, and then aura shards, which is kind of funny and goofy,
right on.
and makes a lot of Ristic players cry when you start bringing in warriors into play and you make four, and then it's like, okay, I get to kill destroy four enchantments, and everyone's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Right.
So I do expect to see like some anti-meta busting probably start to happen. I mean, if people are going to run 3, 4 Ristic study engines, it's if it's Ristic, Mystic, and then you're running Mirror Maid, and then Copy Enchantment, and then Clever Impersonator, and like I do think the format probably needs to do a little bit better job of running enchantment removal. I'm kind of shocked up to this point that we don't, because Ristic Study creates this kind of weird tension, right? Where it's like, I don't want to necessarily remove the Ristic Study because I'm afraid that we'll not have answers for the first push, but
Right.
at the same time, if I don't remove the Ristic Study, we probably just lose really quickly. And
Right.
I'm surprised that mindset hasn't changed at least a little bit with how out of hand it's starting to get with 3, 4 Ristic Studies on the board.
Right.
Same person controlling two of them, and then you're just like, how am I supposed to win through two Ristic Studies on the same board? Like it's the odds of that happening start to grow very slim very quickly.
Right. I'm more surprised that there's not, like you said, well, enchantment removal that you said, but also like more artifact removal. Um,
Yeah,
that's the odd player had a couple pieces of like artifact removal. In case like Kinnon's came up, because he had
we've seen
uh
you see a lot of Siege Smash now, especially after the boil. Like I've seen that card pop up almost everywhere now. I mean, Split Second's busted.
oh yeah.
Um, a Braid has always been around. I'm a little surprised people don't run Vandal Blast. I guess I get why, but man, that's such a powerful card in the format right now. Like I am a little surprised we don't see cards like that more.
I mean, with all the rocks that everyone has, it's gonna set a lot of people back.
Yeah,
So
and maybe that's why, because everyone's like, it's just a spell that's going to get countered 9 times out of 10. But man, if it lands, you should reset everyone back to the Stone Age. Like
right.
it's such a powerful card. It's just another like really strong effect like Culling Ritual. I mean, it doesn't really propel you forward, but in a deck like Magda, where you just need to buy yourself maybe an extra turn or two just to finish
Right.
getting your traders online, like I don't see why. And maybe
I
they are running it. I haven't looked at a Magda list in a while, but you
gonna
know,
say
uh,
the last Magda list I did was either the 3K event that we did or the last one. Can't remember off the top of my head, but uh, fairly certain one of them had Vandal Blast in there.
yeah, I think it's a good card. I'm like I said, a little surprised that we don't see it more often from red decks, but maybe there's a good reason. I don't play a lot of red, so it's not something. It's not a color that I see very often.
I've gotten
Just
away from playing from red decks. Like the last red deck was TNK for me, Blue Farm, and then obviously once Dockside got banned, it just was like, all right, what do we do now? And
yeah,
that's where I found TNT, and I haven't looked back really. I mean, I was on Tibet for a little bit, but then it's just how I can pilot TNT better than Tibet, and someone stops my win attempt. This turn, all right, next turn I have another one.
yeah,
Next turn I have another one. So I like TNT better than Tivit currently, just because I can push multiple win attempts.
yeah. I'm in the same boat. I was on Esper for a long time, and I had different issues with Tibet that kept me off of the deck. And then even my Nagila list. I mean, yeah, it's red, but I'll be honest. I ran like the most bare bones red cards I could. It was heavy in green and heavy in blue,
Hmm.
which was very unique build for Najila, especially at that time where more people were in on the Turbo Adnons builds and like Memo's style of build, and I just took it in a completely different direction for the most part. And yeah, so I'm not super familiar with like a lot of the good red cards, and red just not an area I play in very often. Like you said, I'm much more comfortable in TNT. I'm more comfortable in the Sans red. I do like that the deck is resilient in a lot of the same ways that TNK is, but
Right.
we have a lot of different options at our disposal when we want to with how we want to play the game and what we want to do. So
Right. That's basically spot on. I'm 100% on board with that.
if we're looking at like cards that I'm considering cutting, Bloom Tender I think is one that I'm looking at really closely.
Really?
Really power. It's really powerful. It is, but man, is it eat a Bowmasters
That's fine.
99 times out of 100, right? Like it's. I don't know that it's worth it to keep it in the deck anymore because it always just attracts a lot of hate. Most decks that have access to black, I'm finding are happy to tutor up a Bowmaster against us. So until the day Bowmasters leaves this format, which I will love so much because I hate that card. I don't know that it's a card I want to continue to play. Let's see what else. The other one is Cutzel. I don't know that we need 4 silence effects. It's one I'm kind of iffy on. I like the way it works with Delighted Halfling. I like the fact that people forget about it. And so sometimes you're like, I'm going to go get a 3-drop, and people are like, okay, yeah, 3-drop, who cares? And then you're like, Cutzel, and people are like, oh, crap, like, what do we do?
So
Um,
I like Cutzel because I am still on Polywig Prodigy.
and that makes sense. I just, outside of Polywog, like, you're really never getting that. Like, I guess every once in a while when you have Noble Hierarch out and you're just swinging the one creature, but it doesn't feel like it has a lot of synergy with the rest of the list, other than the fact it's just another silence effect. And I think if TNK can get away with running 3, I think we can probably do so as well. And I want to make room for other cards in the list that I'm tempted to try out, like High Fate Trickster. Looking over at sorceries, like Meme Bet is a card that I would love to love more. I think it's a card that I constantly look at and I'm like, this is a good card. It does good things. I've definitely won games because of it, but it also there's a lot of games where it sits in my hand and does nothing.
Yep.
And so I go back and forth on like, does the deck really need this card? I mean, I love being able to Culling Writ into it because then it just if you're getting a Culling Ritual off and then you get to immediately Meme Bet on top of it, you're probably winning the game because you're going to steal everyone's rocks. You're going to
Right.
put all their permanents back into play onto your board. Super super powerful effect, and I think it's good enough to continue to run. But because of the awkwardness at times, I'm considering a switch up there.
See, that's the one point that you did bring up with Calling Ritual with Betrayal. I personally hate this card with a passion. I cannot stand this card. So
Banal
any
Patrol?
yeah, I as soon as like I see it in a list that I want to play, instant first cut for me. I hate that card with a passion. And I'm not a fan of Mockingbird, but I'll play 10 Mockingbirds over a Betrayal.
Yeah, I really like Mockingbird just because of how easy it is to fetch off the Ranger Captain. I think outside of that, I'd probably play Metamorph first. But yeah, I hear your point. I am surprised that you don't like Meme Bet as much, but I mean, I guess I see why, right? Like, there are a lot of games where you have it in hand and it's just not doing anything for you. Like,
It's a dead
either
card.
graveyards aren't filled up enough, or whatever the situation is. But yeah, I guess I can see it.
I mean, if we're in Team K, sure, I can see
Yeah, you
Betrayal.
have the brain freeze. Yeah, because you have the brain freeze
Right.
always
Brain
to do stuff
freeze,
with.
Betrayal, you do whatever. But outside of it, I think it's bad.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's very fair. The other one I'm looking at, of course, like I said before, just dropping Retraction Helix. I don't know that we need the combo in the deck. I go back and forth on it. It's tough. It's a tough cut for me. I think there's a lot of nostalgia for this card, just because it did win me that top 16 game.
Right.
So I think I'm loath to cut it because of the good feelings it gives me. But I think when I'm looking at this deck honestly and brutally, Retraction Helix is becoming a weakness that the deck I don't know that can continue to afford to to have. So that's a card I'm looking at. Veil of Summer is another one, and I know that sounds a little weird, but I think the deck needs more interaction. And Veil of Summer, while it's pseudo interaction, the amount of times where it's sat in my hand in the middle of a counter war, and I haven't either been able to cast it because I didn't have the green up, or I didn't have an actual counter spell to go into the war with. It's just the Veil, which is like great, but without another counter spell, it didn't really do anything. So it's a card I'm considering. I don't think I will cut it, but it is a card that I'm like noting for the future of like, hey, if this continues to feel bad, maybe there's a cut there.
I mean,
But
I can kind of see, kind of like. So the problem is, I play Tendrils in Legacy, and 4 main board Veil Summers. Card is busted. I love
yeah,
Veil Summer
yeah, it's very good. So I
because,
think
I mean, okay, I can see it being a lot better in 1v1 formats like Legacy Modern. I mean, yeah, it is legal in Modern because I have it in Titan. But with 4-person pod, you have 3 people trying to stop the Veil because you're gonna throw something down that is you push a win attempt. Basically, it's arguably a worse silence because people can still interact.
that's why it's such an awkward card, right? I mean, you can still be silenced when you have Veil ups, and I've had it happen to me once before where I was like, cool, I'm veiled. No one can really stop me now. And then I got silenced. And I was like, gosh, dang it. And I didn't have any more interaction in hand. So
Right.
it was
So
like,
like
great.
that I can see, that I can understand, but
Yeah.
Veil is such a good card
Yeah.
that if you're running green, I don't. Okay, not all green decks need to run Veil, but the majority should run Veil.
No, I completely agree. That's why it's like I said, it's not a card I think I'm going to cut, but it is a card that I'm looking at as like, you've been kind of an underperformer, and I've got like a list of cards that underperform that I'm keeping an eye on because, and this is what I was saying before, right? It's there's not really a bad card in TNT. Like even an underperformer, it's still a really powerful card. Like Veil, like Meme Bet, like these cards are still very powerful. And so it's just figuring out how they fit within the synergy of the list and
Right.
figuring out if there's something better for that slot to fill out the weaknesses that the deck has, right? Like because we have silence effects, Veil becomes a little bit less good, whereas a deck that doesn't have the white, Veil is almost you need to have a Veil. So I think there's an argument to be made for it or against it. I think right now, like I said, it's still an include, but it's just it underperformed this weekend, and I want to keep an eye on it moving forward. Is like because I don't want to make any rash decisions from this weekend. There will be some changes, but that card specifically underperformed 3 times this weekend for me in different games across 2 different decks too, which was kind of funny. So
Yeah, we don't need for those that are wondering about what happened this past weekend from the 8K that you attended. It's let's just say it's a series of unfortunate events that started with your flight.
oh my god, yeah. So yeah, we got stuck. So there's a big snowstorm in North Carolina, and we knew it that there was a chance that this could happen. We talked about leaving the day before, but we'd already booked our flights and our hotels, and we couldn't move anything. So we were like, we'll risk it and see what happens. So we get to the airport. Everything's actually moving smoothly at first. We get on the flight. It's on time, which is crazy considering everyone else around us was delayed or late or missing their flights were getting canceled. So we were like, okay, maybe we're good. Maybe our plane for whatever reason has its stuff together. But they had to de-ice the plane, and the trucks all broke at the Raleigh airport. So we got out to the de-icing area. It took hours. We sat out there waiting in line to de-ice. And by the time we were done de-icing, we didn't have enough fuel to actually take off. So we had to go back to the gate. At this point, they're like, well, people can leave if they want. We're going to try and refuel and go again if it happens. And so our ordeal was lasted, I think it was like 5.5 hours. We were actually, like, it took us to get through the whole process and take off finally. It's only an hour and a half flight, so it wasn't that bad. But we did land. I think it was like 1:30 or 2 o'clock in Boston, and then we had to do the hour and a half drive from Boston to our hotel in New Bedford. So we didn't even get in until like 3:34. Finally got some sleep, but then the event started kind of early, so we were exhausted going into round one. And I don't know if that's why I punted the shit out of round one. It might have been, Like I made a rookie mistake, right? Like I died to an Esper Sentinel off of my Thoracle trigger. So if that tells you like how much of a rookie mistake it was,
Wow.
yeah, I
Wow.
just was not thinking about it. I thought everyone had cast into my Esper, and I was like, I'm good, I got it. And then dude's like, here's a spell, and I was like, oh yeah, well that sucks. Considering right, like no one had anything to actually stop what I was doing, so I literally just needed to remember he had an Esper up, and I had a spell to kill my Esper too, which was even more annoying. So punted that game. Was a mistake there. Punted a couple more games. My round two got scuffed because my opening hand I kept the Thorkel Tainted Pact and mana to cast it, but I also kept a hand that gave me a turn two Rhystic Study. So the Thorkel Tainted Pact was like, the cherry on top, but it wasn't anything
Right.
that I was necessarily. I'm not. This isn't a deck that pushes. Like I guess you could have. I'd rather put the Rhystic Study down and grind value and then have those cards ready. But I got Git probed on turn one. So then everybody knew what I had in my hand, and that changed the entire outcome of the game because the dude next to me literally vamp tutored for a freaking Angel's Grace, and my eyes rolled so far out of my head, like I was highly annoyed.
I
I was like,
will
bro, you
say that I think going forward, you're going to see more Angel's Graces as a gotcha card.
fine with it as a gotcha card. I mean, I think it's a crutch, and it's a crutch that I relied on for a while that I finally got off of after Max finally talked me out of it. But it is a crutch card. I think, tutoring for it at that point in the game was wildly insane, considering the TNT player was running away, or the TNK player was running away with the game. And no matter what I said or did that game, it didn't matter. Everyone's like, you have Thorkel Tainted Pact. We're just going to keep beating you up. And I was like, bro, they
Yep.
got a Smothering Tithe and a
Yep.
Mystic Remora. Please, for the love of God, can we finally pay attention to the person that's running away with this game and not the person that
Nope.
just happened to have a Thorkel Tainted Pact in hand?
Yep.
Not even the man to cast it. That was even the wildest part, too, right? Like, because of the Rhystic Study play and I had a Lotus Petal, I didn't even have the mana to cast it. I was one short, and they were still freaking out. And
Yep.
no matter how many times I showed them I didn't have the mana to even do it, it did not matter. They even killed my Thrasios with a Bowmaster, like
Really?
in that turn cycle. And I'm like, dude, and he was like, well, you could draw a Fierce and defend your Thorkel Tainted Pact. And I was like, buddy, I'm not Thorkel Tainted Pacting. I'm trying to tell you over and over and over again, this is not happening this turn. Please do something
Yeah.
about the TK player.
Yeah, I'm gonna chalk that one up as bad politicking.
I mean, it's not necessarily bad politicking. It's inexperienced players who
Well,
are
yeah.
terrified. It's
Historical.
a card. Right. It's something that it's like, okay, this person has a definitive win, so I'm going to be scared of them, and that's where an experience comes in of like, well, you're not paying attention to what the person who's grinding value and seeing a ton of cards,
Right.
and his point was, well, you have a Rhystic Study, and it's like, well, that's great. I don't have the mana to cast any of these cards, so let's pay
Right.
attention to the person with the Tithe and the Remora, because I had to stop at a certain point drawing cards because the TNT player was getting, or the TNK player was going crazy. We had a Prosper in the pod who was pushing into double draw engines, which was again just wild. And it's a pod where I just could not politic because they were like, "Well, you're just trying to win on your turn," and it's like, dude, I'm just I was to the point where I was like, I will hard cast this Thorkel on my turn and do nothing else just so y'all will shut up about it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's where I was at about it because I was highly annoyed. Get
Mm-hmm.
Probe's a powerful card, and this was against Madeline too, so she's a super good pilot, and was absolutely right to get Probe me and then throw the game into chaos for me after that. So just unfortunate that's the way that game played out. It
Right.
happens. What round three was weird because we had a green red Gruul deck. I couldn't even tell you what it was, like Bello, the raccoon, and it got out of hand so fast, which was kind of crazy. But it like swings for lethal very quickly, and so the whole game was spent like, please don't swing at me, please don't swing at me. And this deck swings for like 40 damage, and it just kept throwing win cons down. So
Jesus.
we were on our back foot like the entire game, and I was like, I've never seen this deck in my life, and I'm no offense to Gruul players out there, but I look at a Gruul deck and I'm like, what are you really doing to me before I've won this game, right? Like generally not
The one that
not too much.
the only one that I'll be have my guard up is Big Thick Dino Mommy.
Yeah, exactly. And even that deck, right? Like how many times have we all seen it flip into, rock, dork, and then it's like great. Then they're stuck with a dino on the board trying to draw into their copy effect. Like, it's a scary deck, but it's a deck with high variance. And I do agree with you. It is the one deck where I'm like on my guard about it. But this Velo is certainly not on my, bingo card of decks to be terrified of. But Jesus, that thing came out of the gates and smacked us in the face. And it turned into a game where we had to keep working together to stop it because it just kept throwing down win cons. And we were like, please stop. I couldn't grind value with Tymna because I had to keep holding up blockers. I couldn't get a draw. He destroyed my draw engines. It was just a nightmare of a game. And yeah, another, like I said, weird one. That's 3 rounds, right? Like I punted 1, 2 weird games. I'm sitting at 0-2, 0-1-2, 2 draws and a loss. And then round 4, I have to mold a 4 or 3, some ridiculously low number. And it's like, you're going to lose that game 9 times out of 10.
Right.
So then 0-2-2 going into round 5. And then round 5, I punted again. So had a Thoracle Thoracle Dumbcon in hand. I needed the extra treasure for my Lotho, and I forgot to pay for a Rhystic Study trigger, and a Bowmaster was out. So had I paid for the Rhystic Study trigger, no one else had anything. I was under a Ranger Captain. I just win. So
right.
So not a good weekend, but like I said, it's been a while since I've had a weekend this bad. So it's probably just a blip, and we'll recover and do fine. Like just
I would say you can only go up from here. Like,
well,
I'm not saying this is bottom of the barrel, rock bottom, but statistically speaking, you can only get better from here.
Yeah, well, I mean, just last weekend I was, I top 16 at SCG Con, so it's not like,
right.
It's not like it was just one bad weekend that, I do probably need to adapt the deck a little bit differently. If Curse Totem's really going to be a game plan that people are legitimately tutoring up and putting into play. Because that's not. I think I'm more used to like just this North Carolina meta where people are tutoring up engines, and up in Massachusetts, at least in my games, and I don't know if this is true for other people who play up there, but a lot of people were tutoring up hate pieces. So a lot of Bowmasters, a lot of Curse Totems, Grafdigger's Cages. Like felt like every game I played, people were tutoring up and putting into play hate pieces rather than engines, which was a little interesting. I thought. I kind of get it because it did slow me down, but it also didn't result in any of them winning. So
right.
I'm not sure if it's a strategy that works, but it is interesting.
Thanks, Jordan, for coming on. I truly do appreciate you taking the time out of your day. If you made it this far and enjoy the video, smash that like button and leave a comment. I'd like to do more of these deck tech videos with bigger name individuals, so let me know. I got a couple other people that I want to do still. So, with that being said, our next CDH event is January 25th at Lewis Game Shop in Monticello. After that, we're going back to Punch Out Gaming and Forest Lake for a cash event on February 15th.